Ukraine's military claims to have recaptured 3 villages in Donetsk region from Russian troops, and it's also launched a number of drone strikes on Russia, one that Moscow says triggered a fire at a nuclear plant. The war raging on, with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, saying the best way forward would be for him to get a face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Zelensky was speaking as his country celebrated Independence Day from the Soviet Union. Kyiv and Moscow once again exchanged prisoners on Sunday, 146 people sent back from each side. Well, let's cross now to our correspondent Gulliver Cragg, who's in Kyiv for us. Gulliver, firstly, the perception in Ukraine at the minute to any possible peace talks. Do they see any hope for progress on the diplomatic front?
Not at the moment, no. I think that Volodymyr Zelensky himself, whilst calling for a meeting with Vladimir Putin, does so knowing that the Russian side have said that they don't see any possibility for that in the near future. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said that the meeting needed to be well prepared and that there was absolutely no agenda. The analysis that we hear from Ukrainian pundits is that the Russians are playing for time, that they sort of told Donald Trump that they were open to the idea of a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, but in reality they're not, because Vladimir Putin has spent nearly 4 years now portraying Volodymyr Zelensky as a comedian, a drug addict, an illegitimate leader, not somebody that a person of his stature, Vladimir Putin, ought to deign to meet with, and it just wouldn't sit with the way that they have shaped Russian public opinion to do that. The Ukrainians actually also, despite what Volodymyr Zelensky might say, and despite the fact that what they want, of course, is peace in the long term, the fact is that they don't see the possibility of diplomatic advances being made now that would really lead to that kind of peace in the long term for Ukraine. In a way, Ukraine also fears too quick moves towards a ceasefire and settlement that would not have weakened Russia, that would not leave Russia in a position where it was not possible to start up the war again soon afterwards. At the moment, the idea of making territorial concessions in order to gain a peace that they think would be only at the best of short-term cessation of hostilities is not what Ukraine wants either.
Meanwhile, Gulliver, there were Hungary and Ukraine's top diplomats exchanged pretty barbed tweets, and that came after, of course, a Ukrainian strike on a Russian pipeline cut off supplies to Hungary and Slovakia. What more can you tell us about the situation there?
Yeah, so Ukraine's campaign of long-range strikes into Russia continues, and they're quite happy with the results of it. They're saying that they're getting more and more precise, and they're targeting places further and further away, including the Ust-Luga gas port near St. Petersburg, for example, and recently the Druzhba oil pipeline, which means that oil supplies from Russia to Hungary and Slovakia have been cut off. They're estimating that it's going to be 5 days, and a few days have passed already, so it's not actually a long-term cut-off. But what happened yesterday was that Volodymyr Zelensky, responding to a question about that, whether deliberately or actually inadvertently, he made a sort of pun. Druzhba means friendship. That's what the pipeline is called. And asking, replying to this question about Hungary's blocking Ukraine's bid to join the European Union, he said friendship between Ukraine and Hungary depends on Budapest, or some words to that effect. And the Hungarian side, in the voice of their foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó, took that as a threat, that Ukraine was basically threatening to do further damage to the Druzhba pipeline if Budapest did not toe the line about Ukraine's EU accession, which Hungary is currently threatening to veto. Whether Volodymyr Zelensky really meant that as a threat, whether it was a joke that he couldn't resist, perhaps ill-advisedly, or whether it was just an inadvertent pun, we don't know. But the Hungarian side seemed to be wanting to milk it for all that it's worth, and the Ukrainians have responded by saying that it's absolutely their right and a necessity for them to target Russian infrastructure that can damage the Russian economy and the Russian war effort. And the Hungarians and also the Slovaks, who've been complaining about this too, ought to long since have diversified and ceased their dependency on Russian energy.
Gulliver Cragg in Kyiv, thanks very much indeed for that.